Professor Kevin Kirkman of the University of KwaZulu-Natal was the first keynote speaker at the Grassland Society of Southern Africa's 58th Annual Congress. He presented research on a drought report that proved very interesting. Prof, thank you so much for chatting to us. First, tell us about your research. Where did the idea for the review come from?
Thank you, Deirdre, and thanks for the opportunity. I've made a point in recent years of trying to collect old documents that date back to the earliest times of agricultural and scientific research in South Africa to see what scientists were thinking in the early days. And I came across this report, which was called the Drought Investigation Report of 1923. And I got hold of an original copy and had a good look at it. And it was really interesting to see what people were thinking in those days, what scientists were thinking, what farmers were thinking, what they thought about climate, farming methods, farming methodology, and how to move forward to conserve the country and maintain the ability to farm economically and ecologically sustainably. And when I looked at the date, it was 1923. It's now 2023, so I thought it would be really interesting to see 100 years later how the thinking has changed and how relevant those early ideas are at the current time.
Going back a bit, how did that report influence legislation and policy?
It was very influential in legislation and policy for a long time in South Africa. Firstly, they identified that there was a dearth of information on fire, veld management, alternative forage sources, and various other aspects. So the outcome of that report was that there was a network of research stations set up in South Africa in the late 1920s and early 1930s as a direct result of that report. And many of those research stations include places like Dooney in the Eastern Cape, Athol and Uitgedacht in Mpumalanga, and various others. So that kick-started agricultural research into particularly veld management, fire management, and pastures and pasture development. And the benefits of that continue until today.
And looking a bit at the broader picture, what influence did Europe have in the way that scientists viewed South Africa?
That was very interesting. The European ecosystems are very different to South African ecosystems, where fire is not important in Europe, and much of Europe is forested or was forested before humans cleared those forests. So many of the European scientists who were active in South Africa during colonial times and other countries in Africa felt that Africa should be forested and South Africa should be forested, and that they assumed that the lack of forests was in fact a result of degradation, and that was incorrect. So in many cases they promoted planting of trees, including many aliens such as syringa and various other trees which are now becoming problematic in South Africa as invaders, and they felt that planting trees would increase the rainfall, would increase soil stability, and would lead to a healthy ecosystem. And in many instances, they were wrong, because our grassland and savanna ecosystems have evolved over a very long period of time to be grasslands and to be savannas, and they don't have the potential for forests.
So, okay, but it's not all bad. What were some of the foresights that researchers had?
There were many really interesting foresights. They recognized the fact that periodic growing season rests, in fact, in the veld. In other words, keeping animals out of an area for a growing season was very beneficial to the production and the health of that veld system. That is something that is still persisting today. They also recognized the movement of animals, crawling of animals overnight in the same place every time led to degradation along paths that animals moved, and they recognized the need to provide water and to disperse animal grazing away from kraals and away from areas like that. So there were quite a few insights that were very useful from that time in terms of veld and veld management.
Staying on the topic of mood, South Africa is a very negative place at the moment, but what were some of the doom prophecies that either did or did not come to pass from that report?
That report was initiated after a very severe drought in 1919, and people were quite negative about the impact of drought and the impact of farming systems on the vegetation of South Africa. And in fact, there was a prediction that if nothing was done, South Africa would become a great uninhabitable desert. Well, that hasn't happened. We're still here. The country is still in pretty good health. And although there is degradation in some areas, the doom prophecies from those days were not correct.
That's good news. And then lastly, Prof, how has the landscape changed and how has it not changed?
Also an interesting one. The information and the observations that they had at the time were that the Karoo was moving eastwards at a rapid rate. In other words, the country was desertifying, and they predicted that the Karoo and Karoo shrub type vegetation was going to invade all of the grasslands through the Eastern Cape, Free State, and going further. In fact, in general, that hasn't happened. And in fact, if we look at the Middelburg area now, which is more or less at the interface between the Karoo and the grasslands, we find that grasslands are actually moving westwards at the expense of the Karoo shrub type vegetation. So areas around Middelburg that used to be real Karoo are now much more of a grassland. So some of their predictions were also not correct.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
There you have it. That was Prof Kevin Kirkman from the University of KwaZulu-Natal.